Hey everybody, Jay from the Musky Shop with my buddy Tom LeBeau from Minnesota. Tom is the owner of Big Fork Lures. He makes all these amazing baits by hand, and we're going to explain he's going to explain the process, the incredible process that goes through making these fine cedarwood handmade baits.
You know, all our baits are handcrafted white cedar, made out of white cedar. They are initially carved on a milling machine.
Right.
And after they go through that milling machine, I carve two at a time. The bait isn't totally symmetrical when it comes off that machine. So I have to actually go over to a disc sander and, you know, get it balanced. I look down the length of the lure, and if one side's, you know, a little bit heavy on one side and it's not symmetrical, I have to actually go on that disc sander and get that shape, that balanced shape. Because if you don't, if it's really out of whack, that bait won't track right. It just won't perform. So after that process of getting that bait symmetrical on that disc sander, then the bait goes to the next stage. I go to the drill press, and I got what's called a flap sander that revolves around a couple thousand RPM, and I hold it up against that flap sander, and it almost gets it to the point smooth enough. You can only get it so smooth at that stage. And the final stage is the hand sanding. And that finally gets it to that glass, you know, baby skin smooth finish. Then it's ready for the paint room. And then they're dipped. First in a sealer coat that seals the wood.
And then you have to let it dry.
Yeah, there's about 2-3 hours of dry time.
Okay.
Even though it's lacquer-based paint, it dries fast. But still, to get the solvents, you know, pretty much out of that paint, it's got to have at least a couple hour flash time.
So actually, you can get two processes done in one day. After you seal it, I imagine you're priming it.
Yeah, then that's the next stage. Putting on, and that's all dipped. There's a special machine that I had made, and it goes on super heavy, you know, and that's another thing that adds to that really glass finish, that end product finish that we, you know, are quite proud of on our baits. And then after that white primer, that's typically the final stage for that day. There's a science to solvent-based paints. I mean, it can really be cruel. Then the next day, you take your airbrush, you put on your decoration, you know, layering your different hues. Like, for example, on this hot perch, you know, initially, after that, with the white primer, I'll lay down a chartreuse and then a hot green on top, on the top third that goes onto the back, and then I'll put the hot orange belly on that one, and then put on the perch bar patterns, and then tie it all together with the airbrush black down the back, and then behind the eyes.
Multiple different stages of paint get put down and let to dry, and
yep,
time consuming.
Very, very labor intensive, you know. And then that gets painted, you know, once that prism film is laid down, then I spray over that, and then I feather it, layer it down, and just feather that, you know, from the top down to the belly, you know, and go up over that scale. Mm-hmm. Initially, I laid down a pearl scale, and then that transparent red dye paint then is paid over that. And you can see how that transparent paint gives it that depth look, because you can see through the paint. You know, a solid, you know, naturally a solid, you know, pigment paint, you wouldn't get that effect. And then to finish it off, again, it's just tied together with the narrow black band down the back, and then behind on the eye, so that can stand out.
And then that dries properly, and then
yeah.
I imagine the clear coating.
Yeah, and then that'll be, you know, after that first initial stage of the sealer, the primer, one day, and then the next day is the paint decoration with airbrush. And then usually overnight, you know, I got a heated paint room, and then that's, you know, pretty much all the solvents from when I decorate it get flash off, and they're pretty much have all escaped. Then the next day I'm ready for the 3-day hand applied epoxy top coat finish. You can only apply one coat a day. You can't do it 3 coats all in one day.
It'll ruin it.
It takes a full 24 hours for one coat to process enough, cure, and you got to wait till the next day. So the 3 coats, that's 3 days, and that's all hand brushed on. That clear coat epoxy finish, after you hand apply that, like I said earlier, those baits are on a bar on pins. Then that, after you apply your epoxy, that goes on a drying wheel that revolves slowly, and that revolves for about, on average, 3 to 4 hours until that's cured enough so that epoxy, if you didn't do that, that epoxy would just all, just slide down to the tail of the bait, So that's got to revolve to cure that epoxy so it goes on all evenly. Okay? And that you just repeat that process for 3 days. Okay, that stage is done. Then the final stage, you get to your hardware. We use all stainless steel screw eyes. They're dipped in epoxy. The holes, you drill a pilot hole. You can't just, make a little impression or you're going to force the screw eye into the body. I mean, it would put too much pressure on the wood and it would cause serious splitting issues. So you got to pre-drill it with a pilot hole, then dip your screw eye into the epoxy, and that as you're driving that screw into that body, and with that epoxy that you dip it in, see, that brings it right into the body, and that helps keep water from getting into the bait.
Which is critical. Water
which
gets
is
into the
critical
bait,
because when you get water
Yeah.
into wood bait, you got expansion.
Yep.
Then it's the beginning of the end of the finish.
Sure.
So that really helps prevent. It basically prevents water from getting in at that area that you've, when you drilled that pilot hole. And and then they all get tank tested. Each bait, they all have basically they got lead in them to control the action.
Yep.
Like the sand cats, they got just enough lead applied and positioned in the part of the lure so it dives, like on the 8-inch, for example. We got 2 different areas where that lead has been added. On the front, it's got the majority of the weight. It's more forward weight bias, so when you jerk it, it dives. It gets to dive. You got just enough weight in there so that it dives on the pole, but you don't want to put too much weight in there. Then you're going to kill the action, because that's the uniqueness of the sand cat. It's got just enough weight to dive, but not too much that it's going to kill the buoyancy, and that's what gives us wobble on the dive, and then on the rise, that body roll action, and then it rests at level horizontal position on the surface.
Well, they're amazing baits, and the process is much appreciated by a great number of people these days, Tom. I mean, really, you're doing amazing stuff, and being a perfectionist has its advantages, doesn't it?
Well, it certainly has. I just basically that's how I've developed my following. Over the years, and they don't. If you make a good quality bait, people, they understand that these baits just aren't, mass produced, and they'll stick with you, man. You get that loyal following, and I try to keep my baits as reasonable as I can on the prices, but when they understand all what's involved, they know that our baits are going to cost them a little bit more than the run-of-the-mill average, mass-produced bait. So.
I think people do, and they appreciate it, and the response has been amazing. You make great stuff, and we appreciate. Hey, hard work pays off, doesn't it?
Well, it certainly has, and I struggle to try to keep up with. I call Raleigh and Helen's the mothership. They basically when they say jump, how high? I mean, they're my guys.
I never asked you to jump, Tom. Come on now.
I'm just kidding, man. But they're the main guys, and they've treated me right over the years, and it's just much appreciated. So.
Well, thanks a million for stopping in and doing a quick vid with us today, Tom. We appreciate it.
Absolutely, great to be here.